for example, in focal areas such as the Bangweulu, working working in Liwa National Park, the surrounding holding program the Liwa GM area of is opening up, both in terms of structure, mining opportunities, but so as the Upper Zambezi as I think a valuable aspect to our program. It shows commitment, and it also shows our long-term investment in terms of how in terms of our conservation and management of natural resources. Potentially, we are working with more than a example with DPW and fish. That between those partners who've got the mandate, those partners, for example, who into the other, and that really embraces the landscape and partnership approach. And importantly as well, we think research has got a particular role to play in all of this. How can research on fisheries inform what Department of Fisheries is doing? How can research on wildlife inform, for example, what DMP is doing? So it shows for a very long time conservation has been silos. Just a brief on the overview of the Upper Zambezi. Most of you know, even from our geography, the Zambezi River is the fourth largest river. It's a transboundary river, and the catchment, what we're calling the catchment, includes both the surface water but also the groundwater connection of the Zambezi River. Within this transboundary area, it supports an approximately 40 million of people. These are local livelihoods, and it also hosts a series of wetland systems such as Luena, wetland systems such as Lua, Barotse, and also the Okavango Delta. So these are strategic wetland systems that play a disproportionate role in the health of the ecosystem. For example, the Barotse system holds water for 2 months at a time and slowly releasing it downstream, both to communities but also other countries as well. So this shows a significant role in terms of the national but also the regional economy of Southern Africa. I'm just going to just focus in terms of what I'm calling the biodiversity and socio-economic values of the Upper Zambezi. As my previous colleague stated, the Kabompo catchment is an important headwaters due to the presence of what's called the Mavumba forest. These are semi-evergreen forests that play an important role in terms of the headwaters of the Zambezi. So the flooding that is seen both downstream and the Barotse is in part largely due to this headwater system, these headwater forests that play an important role in terms of recharge areas and also flooding and also water provisions downstream and also further in the region. And what we've seen, and this is really backed by scientific data, that these strategic areas, what we're calling headwaters or water resource protected areas, are important in terms of water provisioning, ecological importance, but also they're also very sensitive. So what can we do? One provision is how can we identify such areas as being declared water resource protected areas, and this is something that we're doing with the Water Resources Management Authority. This helps them secure what we're doing downstream, but also the water security of the country. I'm just going to play this. It's a timeline series, and I would just like you to bear in mind is at the bottom of the screen. It shows the flooding pattern of the Barotse. If you can just play for me. So what you're seeing here is this is the Barotse floodplain, and mostly in January, in December, what you start to see is that the Kabompo, Lungebungu, as well as Wambimba starts to flow. Eventually, as you are trying to approach January, the water is approaching its peak in terms of the spatial extent of the flooding. At its peak, which is most times in February and March, you find that the water then is, the floodplain are sort of increased in size. And this is mostly between February and March. And so what you find there is that then the water somehow stores all this water. And then as we approach May, April, it starts to recede. That water then starts to flow. And this sort of receding nature of the Barose floodplain then starts to reduce towards August. And what is important about this flooding pattern is that it also affects the land use activities in terms of fishing, in terms of livestock, but also in terms of natural resource use. And this is important. However, what we don't really understand so far is what are really the dynamics. Is it precipitation? Is it surface water? Is it groundwater? And if we are to know this, we can even know how then to protect this huge floodplain that we call the Barotse. So another important feature about the Upper Zambezi is the network of key protected areas, what we're calling national parks and GMA. However, most of these are severely depleted. For example, West Lunga is classified as a depleted national park, largely because of the civil wars that happened a couple of years back. And also Liwa National Park is classified as recovering. So what you find is that, however, the habitat itself is very intact. And that's an opportunity now of how to conserve and make these national parks come back to where they were. And an important point just to raise is that obviously Liwa National Park hosts the second largest wildebeest migration, just next to Serengeti. This is something I think we need to preserve and really cherish and see how can we take advantage and support this viable national park. Okay, like I said, these are recovering wildlife population. For example, this is the work that we did with WWF together with the West Lunga Conservation Project in terms of monitoring some of the species that have not been seen in as far as maybe 5 to 10 years back. And we said noticing all of these critical species, and it shows that the park is coming back to life. And it shows that all this investment and concern is actually bearing some fruit. Yeah, an important thing obviously is that also local livelihoods. This is important to say that most of these areas, local communities are oftentimes live in poverty. They depend on natural resource use. They depend on moderate natural resources. So in as much as we're doing all this conservation, it's important to bear in mind that how can we improve the local livelihoods of these people who actually live within this huge landscape. So how do we see then the emergence of mining? And we see the emergence of mining in terms of two ways. One is it's mining in the emergence of mining and how it's arising in national parks and GMA, and also mining in terms of how it's affecting these critical headwater areas. So, for example, we know obviously that Northwestern has been called the new copper belt. We know that most of these opportunities were slowly moving towards this area. And then what that creates then is that it creates opportunities for mineral exploration and mining. Yes. Okay, so as you probably more know, is that most of Zambia has been mapped in terms of its geological potential for hydrocarbons, for minerals, cobalt, and so forth. However, the area that we work in, or the Upper Zambezi, has not been mapped for several reasons, largely because of the geological profile of the area. And this is when then we're trying, the Ministry of Mines and Mills Development is trying to get in terms of how can you explore. How can we explore and know what's actually there in terms of hydrocarbon, oil, and also other potential minerals. So with that, most of the country has been put into what are called mining blocks. And for us, the key mining blocks that are important for us is what you are seeing as 17, 18, 21, and 22. And what you see immediately when I think when you look at these maps is that they are overlaying with these critical areas that we're calling high value conservation habitats, such as West Lunga National Park, Liwa National Park. So then how do you then compromise and marry the aspect of mineral exploration, which will eventually go into mining, versus conserving these critical habitats and high value habitats? So just this morning, in fact, over lunch, my colleague Bruce Elender, who's based in Jivundu, texts me and says, listen, there's actually a new license exploration that has been issued in West Lunga. That is two mining exploration licenses being issued in the national park. And it's alarming because what we're saying is that these are high value areas, want them to recover. However, there's someone or there's an authority issuing out license there. So for us as members of WWF is how then do we sort of mitigate that and make a case for these high value habitats? Even for example in Liwa itself, there's also an exploration license which is actually owned by ZCCMH, which is also potentially want to start some physical seismic mineral exploration in the national park. And what we did with stakeholders is write a letter to them and say, okay, this cannot go ahead because of these reasons in terms of it a national park, in terms of the communities who didn't give consent. How then do you go ahead? So these are sort of the reasons I think that we put forward. But maybe a more systematic approach to it is how then do we work with the Ministry of Mines but also other mining companies. As we know, mining attracts other sectors such as energy, because obviously mining requires a lot of energy. And what we've seen potentially is that the emergence of hydropower dam, which is at in Mulunga district on the Kabompo. Another important point to raise is the work that we're doing with the National Heritage Conservation Commission and the Barose Road establishment. And this is around the inscription of the Barose floodplain. So this then led us to a conversation with the Ministry of Mines. Because as I said, we have the mining box, which are 17. Those red lines that you're seeing there are the 4 mining box. And therefore, according to UNESCO, you can have mining within this area of the cultural landscape. Now, what we're trying to propose then is that, one, this is already a Ramsar site. Secondly, most of these areas include national parks and also GMAs. And then thirdly as well, these are important cultural and heritage sites, meaning that obviously mining is, if mining had to proceed from exploration to mining, it will compromise a lot of ecological and cultural values of this area. And this conversation has led us to a place where we have a unique opportunity then to start thinking more strategically as WWF. How can we engage with the mining companies as well as the regulatory authorities? So what I'm going to present to you are 5 strategies in terms of how we as WWF intend to move forward on these on these threats. The first one is that how can we protect these national parks and also GMAs? The first thing is that partnerships works, and I think our partnership, for example, in West Lunga National Park, where we try to get we try to create these collaborations and partnerships with unlikely players, for example, such as mining companies, and how they can support the work in West Lunga. But also, can we think of alternative models of how large-scale investments and how these national parks are actually supported in terms of budget allocation and also support law enforcement and make them thrive again. The other one is about how then do we think of nature-based economies. Most times as NGOs, we're always at the back foot of always chasing development, if I can call it, trying to stop development. However, can we think of making conservation actually improve rural livelihoods? Because if, for example, you go to a person and say, okay, conservation, most times when we're talking about conservation, we don't really bring in the aspect of improving their livelihoods. So if conservation can be tied to tangible economic benefits with significant improvement to local livelihoods, at the same time, these economic benefits also supporting conservation, we could make then a case such that then people don't have to choose to say, okay, either I have maybe an unsustainable mine, or maybe I conserve, for example, my river and so forth. And I think this sort of bankable projects even helps us to start thinking of who else can we engage in the private sector, which investments can we attract these sustainable investments in these high value habitats. Then the last one is about research and how the value of information, or everyone, including private sector, the mining companies, government, values research. They want you to speak from an evidence-based approach. And therefore, over the last 3 years, we've been doing research in terms of hydrology, in terms of fisheries, in terms of wildlife, such that even as we're making economic case for why we need to conserve these areas, is backed by science, and it is actually makes a case, and it makes meaningful evidence. Then lastly is how can we get sort of this kind of conversation actually going, the advocacy and awareness, because we know that most times in many of these areas that we work in Upper Zambezi, they're very remote, and therefore you won't find very a sporadic CSO presence. How then can we sort of stimulate this kind of mobilization and community interest in EIAs, in SEAs, for example, in how they can get more involved in the development agenda of these areas? And then also, how can we work with the youth? Obviously speaking, the colleagues who are here about an hour ago, how can we get them thinking about the long-term vision of the areas in which they live? Then lastly, it's about, I think, influencing the developmental agenda in terms of extractives and also environmental compliance. And I was glad that my colleagues previously even highlighted some of the compliance standards that they are implementing, and this is good. And what we think is that we should actually be more engaging with these private sector partners like mining companies. We should also be more engaged with regulatory authorities such as ZEMA, Ministry of Mines and Minerals Development. And the unique opportunity then that we have in the Upper Zambezi is that right now we are more of at exploration stage before we get to the active mining. Although of course some mining activities have actually begun, but a lot of it is at exploration. And how can we engage, for example, these partners to influence a sustainable mining agenda? And I think currently the ministry is also very, very excited about that. And I think our discussions with other players like, for example, FQM, are also interesting in terms of how can we have potentially collaboration regarding West Lunga. Then the other one is how can we promote some environmental compliance? And this compliance relates both the small scale and large scale environmental compliance. And then lastly then is that how can we make these investments, this developmental investment, large scale environmental investment actually work for conservation? So these are sort of our 5 strategies, how we see us as WWF trying to get ahead and not always being reactive to say, okay, no, let's fight this. But maybe there's a lesson to be learned from Zimbabwe, for example, in terms of how they said no mining in national parks. So maybe in conclusion, I'd like to offer some key lessons that we learned from the Upper Zambezi. The first of all is that conservation needs to be long-term. If partners and both in terms of traditional authorities, government see that it's a long-term conservation agenda, it's more likely that you're going to get their support, and they're going to be able then to really make a meaningful difference and also trust you that you actually have their interests at heart. And I think that's the space in which we're moving at in terms of securing this long-term conservation commitment that make meaningful sense. But also the other one is how can we engage more with the mining companies? For a very long time, conservation organizations have been sort of holding on into the space of mining discussion. How can we start talking to them? How can we become, for lack of a better term, friends with them? How can we start engaging with them in terms of how they can better do business? Yeah. Then the other one is obviously how can we start think of a sustainable mining agenda, not only for the Upper Zambezi, but even for Zambia as a whole. It's right now it's a bit not very systematic, and I'm glad that there's a process of reviewing the Mining Act, which sort of creates an opportunity for us to influence how mining and exploration is done. Then is it possible really that we can have a position as a country on no mining in national parks? We learned from Zimbabwe, who said no mining national park. Is it something that at the end of this meeting, we can say, how can we take this point forward? No mining in national park. If it has to be done, it has to go through set very stringent processes. And I'm hoping that maybe the facilitators for this meeting can really take this point in terms of the action going forward. Then lastly, this requires a mix of both government, private sectors, and also NGOs, but also researchers to help us really brainstorm around it. Because the issues that we're discussing here apply not only to mining, but even to other sectors such as forestry, where we see where there's a concern about how people are benefiting, how we're distributing our fiscal resources, how communities, themselves communities are actually benefiting. So with that said, maybe just to end in terms of what as a program we feel going forward is that partnerships work, and it's important that we get everyone on board to solve this complex issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. Can we agree that there shouldn't be any mining in the national park? Okay. Your Royal Highnesses and all protocols are observed. At this point in time, we will only allow two questions, and they will be like this. They will be done in this way. We'll have one question coming from the Royal Highnesses, and the other one will come from civil society. Just two questions. We are looking at time, which is running away so fast. So, yes, may I take Your Royal Highness there? Yes, and those questions will obviously be directed to them, not me. Thank you.
Thank you. My question, I think, goes to Mr. Ngwira. I appreciate all the support that FQM and the Kansanshi are providing to Northwestern Province. I remember in one meeting where we met even the President, as Northwestern Province, especially the traditional rulers, we felt that our natural resources are being gotten to develop the other parts of the country. And therefore, like one facilitator was just saying, we did not request, but we made demands. And 3 demands that were made were that a full-fledged university should be built in Northwestern Province. And also, we wanted a shift from Solwezi to Mfumbwe as the Northwestern Provincial headquarters. And the third, which we thought was very important, was that the resources, especially coming from timber and the mining, because we are boasting of Kalumbila, Lumwana, Kansanshi, which is one of the oldest. But even in Solwezi, look at the township here, roads. They are in a horrible position. And this is why we made these 3 demands. Even Chief Chomba, have now coped. They have even moved the provincial headquarters from Livingstone to Chomba, and Chomba is doing very fine. But us in Northwestern Province who started this idea, nobody is listening to us. We feel so disadvantaged. And yet, these mines are making millions of money. I need your serious indulgence and comments. I thank you.
You may react to that, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, for, I think, the 3 questions. The points: full-fledged university, Solwezi being moved to Mufumbwe. These two items, we can only take note and maybe follow up. My apology, we do not have the jurisdiction, the powers to comment on this because the shift of the district administration is outside our powers. And we can only take note, and my colleague there, Brian, is taking note of that. The issue of the university, it's a need. And thank you very much for that submission. So we are going to also record that as a submission from stakeholders, as a follow-up to that. Yes. Sharing again of the resources, the 3 mines in Northwestern Province and the quality of public infrastructure in Solwezi district. I can only share what we are doing, some of the interventions that we've put in place under Kansanshi mine for the urban roads in Solwezi. We've gone into an arrangement with the local authority to use part of the resources supposed to be paid to the council as a way of trying to do some of the community roads, in addition to the other roads that we support through our CSER initiative. Again, it's a good initiative, not for forward. Unfortunately, I cannot comment on the second item because our hands are tied on that. I think we'll submit to the district administration officially that we got this from the conference.
Okay, I guess that concludes the first question from, the Royal Highnesses, and the answer has been provided. So the second one will come from civil society. Yes, just there.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I also have some observations and maybe questions to Kalumbila in particular. And I'll seek an apology if what I'll ask is history, because what we worked on in Kalumbila was a long time, 2013 or so. We had a presentation, I think, from ActionAid that showed how corporates avoid taxes, and sometimes how corporates use their corporate position to not to follow the law. We have the case of Kalumbila where land was provided, about 518,000 hectares by the chief, which is supposed to be provided by the president, because the chief, the limit is 250 according to the law. By that time, they did not have title to even surface rights, but they went ahead. I would want you to comment on your social corporate responsibility as regards to engagement with the chief directly, because we had submitted that Kalumbila should be the case of a partnership with Chief Msele, where we had proposed 1% of what comes from the mine to go to the chiefs or the traditional authority. Is this something that Kalumbila in your work has ever discussed? Because it's a submission that was even taken to the minister and even the mines themselves at that time. I don't know if you're in a position to comment on that, because it's one thing that even the chiefs and the community would want to see, a type of social corporate responsibility in a partnership.
Okay, you may react to that again.
Okay, thank you very much. We've interacted, I think, for some time, and we take the institution as our good partner, and it's good that the question has been so that we can also maybe shed light on some of the historical issues. It's true, we got a mining license. And the law provides that when you have the mining license in Zambia, according to the Mines and Minerals Act, you cannot mine until you acquire surface rights. And the surface rights, they are at two levels. If you are mining in leasehold, state land, you get the surface rights from Ministry of Lands. If your mining license is in traditional land, you get the surface rights from the chief, the traditional leader. And what is needed there is, once you get the surface rights for mining purposes, for mining, you have the right to go ahead and start developing the mine. So in terms of compliance, just make it clear, the law in Zambia allows a developer who has a mining license and surface rights, if you are in traditional land, from the chief to proceed with the development. There's no prohibition that you must have title deed and convert the surface rights first into leasehold before you mine. Number two, we applied for title. The process starts with first acquiring the surface rights through the chief. The chief consented for 518 square kilometers, you're right, but there's no way that could have been converted without presidential consent, because the limit for our traditional leaders is 250 hectares. Above that, you need another signature from His Excellency, the President, to consent, according to the Lands Act. We walked through the process, through up to the final stage where we were pursuing the presidential consent. At that point, government convened an interministerial team to review our application, and the surface rights that we acquired from the chief was reduced to 385 square kilometers. So right now, we are mining based on the surface rights from traditional leader. We have not abandoned our pursuit for the title. It's work in progress. And we commenced development of the mine based on the legal provisions in Zambia. So we were compliant. And so, if in terms of our corporate social responsibility, the most important thing as a corporate entity that we look for is, first is to comply with the law in every place where we conduct business, because it's a legal obligation, and we did just that. Yes, there were some, I think, misunderstandings, but that's just what the law provides for. And anyone who is a registered entity in Zambia, who is conducting business in Zambia, whether local or foreign or multinational, is a law that provides for what should be done. And if you break the law, there's also another procedure that is followed. So the title deed does not apply to mining.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ngwira, for that. And I'm afraid I have to stop here. From here, let me, as I step down from the main stage, let me call upon Mr. Piri or CEJ to come here. Professor, I can see you. You are right there. Can you please come and take up your role as I step down crying and kicking? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. After all has been said and done, I don't need to speak much because all the big people have spoken already. Your Royal Highnesses, civil society, government officials present here. Now, we are almost coming to the close of our deliberations. It is our view that we could quickly break into our breakaway sessions. In the breakaway sessions, may I propose that the presenters that were meant to do the presentations of those breakaway sessions go into the breakaway sessions and offer the guidance that will be required in those sessions. May I further propose that the main business in the breakaway sessions be the presentation of resolutions, action-oriented points. We are slightly moving away from just resolutions to, we want to see this action, that action. And lastly, may I also propose that those actions are around the key thematic areas that we earlier presented or that are represented by the chart around us. So next, we, as already mentioned earlier, the chiefs, traditional Royal Highnesses, have a place that is already designated for the breakaway sessions. I would like to suggest that we could begin by your Royal Highnesses, withdraw into our breakaway session room. May I also request, I can see a hand, maybe just before our Royal Highnesses leave, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Is it possible to have a copy of these presentations? And the Royal Highnesses have that?
Thank you very much.
They're very useful presentations.
Yes, during the breakaway sessions, we'll put together these sessions and would suggest that we get a direct link to send them through soft copies. I think that would be faster. And we'll provide those sessions, yes, including the speeches. And may I also take this opportunity to mention that the resolutions, the comments, the special messages that have been sent, there is going to be a distribution mechanism that will also forward to your communication channels. And then we also have channels for further correspondence or further correlationship with us and the partners that we have. So yes, we will. We may also go around to ensure we have everybody's detail, so we don't just depend on the registration details you left there. Yes, we'll do that. Yes. So may I ask that we rise in respect to our traditional leaders as they leave. Then, as our traditional leaders leave, we settle down again so we can get the procedure in which we're going to do the breakaway sessions. Thank you very much. Please rise. Thank you very much. We may be seated. Just give me a minute, please. Thank you very much. For those with the agendas, I'd like to draw attention to page number 6 of the agenda. Page number 6 of the agenda. So you will notice that from item number 11 to item number 15, those are breakaway session groups. I would propose that the presenters of those groups take note of where we will be. I would suggest that the first one, that is group item number 11, the breakaway session for land rights and tenure and water rights, that breakaway session group, I would suggest meet in the first room here, just on my left. Okay. I would further suggest that the second group, which is the breakaway session with the presenters that include JCTR, that item number 12, that group I would suggest meets on my left, this side. I would further suggest that the third group, that is the breakaway session, that is whose presenters were CSER and the Ministry of Mines, meet in the next group. There should be a room there. Will be guided further by the executive director for the Center for Environment Justice. I understand there's a third place. Okay. It's about 5, so just 5. This 5. Okay. So far we've talked about two meeting places, and we'll form a third meeting place that's on my right here. So in this room we'll have 2 basic groups, one group this side, one group the other side, then the other group in the room there. I will suggest that we randomly take a number between 1 and 3, and that will lead to the group that we actually belong to. And in those groups, we will ask facilitators, presenters to actually join you. So let's say the 1s will be in there, and the 2s will be this side, and the 3s will be here. That's okay for now? So let's randomly pick a number, maybe starting from the back, going that way. That's 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, please. Help me go through those numbers until we get here, so we have our number. Starting with, yes, the last one, yes. room. So one's in the room, the two's over here, and the three's here. Yes, please. And just as we split, may I just see briefly, as we split the groups, may I briefly there? Okay, there's just one more.
Chair, sorry, maybe just guide us. How long should this exercise take? Is it 5-10 minutes? We are looking at time.
This exercise should take approximately 30 minutes. We should be back here at around 17:30. Considering time, what's the time now?
No, that's too long.
Then that's 20 minutes would be fine.
Yeah.
At the ones we're going, Mr. Mumba. One. First, could you?